Hi, this is Roger. Thanks for dropping by. Definitive this time. Thanks really so much to Ray Barkalow of First Rays, who responded quickly and in a detailed manner that I can understand. So detailed, technical and easy for Roger. So cheers for that. I have done a further inquiry to clarify what I'm doing now, but I'm pretty confident I'm on the right road. So we go back to this parts per million of the nitrogen element of the fertilizer, which the big boys use to determine the level of feed they need to give. The reason the other elements are not worried so much about is that when you're feeding your orchids, you should be feeding them because they're growing. And the main element for growth is nitrogen, so it's the most important one to measure. The others are less relevant. They all contribute in some way, and it's complicated, and I don't need to know. So what we've basically come up with, which is what I'm going to do now, is a way of getting a solution that is known. So that's the start point. The way to get the solution that's known is to have a gallon of my RO water, which is what I've got here. Right. First of all, backtracking, stock solution, which I've been keeping in the fridge. Absolute no-no. Do not keep mixed up fertilizers in the fridge. Now, the reason, in my defense, I kept it in the fridge was I was told, well, keep it cool and dark. Well, the fridge seems to be cool and dark, but apparently if you chill a mixed solution down, things can start happening with the molecules of the elements, and things can start joining together or separating out, and it'll affect the balance. It'll affect the mix chemically at that low level. So keeping it in the fridge is a no-no, so that's going down the sink. So before I go any further, I'm going to go and put that down the sink. Good job there's not much left. I hate waste. And I'll come back with a nice rinse container. Right. Nice clean container to start again when we get to that bit, but not yet. This is the only time you will ever see this lid come off in my grow room. The reason is every second that this lid is off, the stuff inside will start to absorb moisture and go clumpy. So that lid's going to stay off for the absolute minimum time. There's stuff in these types of fertilizers deliberately there, so that they absorb moisture and dissolve. Well, I don't want that dissolving. I want it dissolving in there, so the lid ain't going to stay off long. The magic figure of 125 parts per million nitrogen is not an arbitrary figure. It's the figure that was used in the experiments at the Michigan State University when evolving this formula. The reason that figure was used was scientifically based, and it was for actively growing plants. There's not a lot of point in testing a fertilizer on a plant that's dormant, is there? They have to be actively growing or they're not going to use the stuff, and you can't see whether it's working or not. So that's the arbitrary figure, and that's the figure I'm going to try and aim at. Now, this is not exact science. I haven't got scales to weigh out my mix to that level, but basically the recommended dose for 150 parts per million of nitrogen is a teaspoon per gallon of RO water. Now I can measure a teaspoon. I hope it's a level teaspoon and not a heaped teaspoon. You can see where the iffy bits come in, can't you? But what I'm going to do, because I want to try and get the 125, is that's a bit less than a teaspoon. Yeah, a bit less than 150. It's not going to be exact, but it's going to be close enough. I don't need to be exact. So my goal is to mix up a gallon solution of usable fertilizer first. Yeah, so let's just do that bit. Give it a good shake. And I'll get on to another bit in a minute why I like a strong stock solution, but in the meantime what we will do is get our nearly level teaspoon, and then the lid's going straight back on, I can assure you. Okay, that's a bit less than a teaspoon. Not a lot less, but a bit less. That goes in there. Pretty blue colours. Where's my lid? That goes straight back on. Ugh. That needs a goodly shake. Okay, that gives it a good mix. But now what I've got to do is leave that for a while to make sure it's thoroughly dissolved, giving it a shake every now and again. So I'll come back at that point. Yeah, that needs time, and I don't want to film it, obviously. So just to get it dissolved, a couple of shakes, give it some more time, and then I'll be back when that is ready to use. Okay, what we now have is 1 gallon of RO water mixed with a bit less than a teaspoonful of my fertiliser to give me an approximate value of 125 parts per million of the nitrogen element ready to use. And that I will do shortly, but now we get on to the good bit. So I know I'm going to use this in a minute. I've got to water my mount, so I'm putting in the sort of amount I would use today, which is about that. Actually, I'll go a bit more. At this stage, a little bit of waste is not the end of the world. Now this is the good bit. We go back to our scientific gadgets that at best are hit and miss. But it's all I've got. These are the only tools I've got. I'm not spending a fortune on gadgets when this needs to be near enough not scientific. So that's all I'm going to do. And this is the bit I'm after for several reasons. Is the TDS value of this. Jesus Christ. That's what I was expecting. And it's frightening. The TDS reading on there is 630. This is a general purpose feed for actively growing orchids. And the maximum I've used so far this year is 200. Way off. I've been starving me poor plants. And there's me here telling you lot, you know, feed and water well during the growing season. And what does he do? Starve the poor blighters. Okay, so that TDS value is 630. That is now a known value. Yeah? So, that's all right. There's something else I want to check. And I know this is now going to be down far better a level is the pH. Because the sheer amount of fertiliser that's in there is going to take that down below the 6 mark. Hopefully down into the 5s, but not into the 4s, please. Christ, that's low. That's not good. I'll have to have a think about that. That's actually the lowest this pH meter has ever said, and it says 4.5. Below 5 I'm not happy with. Now what do I do? Look, this was done by a flipping university based on science. I'll worry about that element of it later, but that is a low pH. Very low. Now of course it could be based on the fact that the RO water that I use starts at a neutral value of 7. Let's think about that. If the water they were using, RO water nonetheless, was say 8, then that figure would be 5.5, roughly, yeah? Which would be a more sensible figure. That I don't like, that's low. But nonetheless, as I said, this is based on science, and there is no mention of pH in this scientific thing that was done to develop this formula. Now, I might have to manually up that pH a bit because I don't like it being that low. That's below any recommendation. Let me just turn that off if I can do it. if I can reach, tippy toes. Just get warm. Worry about that later. Okay, so that's my 1 gallon mixed up, ready to use. And despite my worries about the pH, I am going to use it. And quite honestly, it won't take long to get rid of it. But my theory of feeding at a lower level more frequently will come into its own in a minute. Yeah? So now we go on to, that's for today, and probably tomorrow, maybe a bit left over the next day, and it's gone. That's my gallon of usable mix gone. So then we go back to my original theory, where I have a very strong mix that I add to my RO water with a now known TDS value based on around 125 parts per million of nitrogen. And I can just use a percentage of that TDS value to adjust that nitrogen element. You know, so that was 125. You know, if I wanted a nitrogen value of half of that, then my TDS level needs to come down by half. If I want it twice as strong, we go into 4 digits, and we don't do that, or I don't. A little and often is the way orchids live in the wild. Right, now I'll try and show you, without leaving this lid off too long, why I want a strong stock solution. Let's see if I can get this in where you might be able to see it. Yeah, that's perfect. If you look at the top now, on the left hand side we have some quite large granules of one type, one colour, some medium granules of a different colour, virtually pure white, and on the right hand side we have powder. How do you get one of those to get a balance of all of those elements? You're going to end up with more of one, less of the other, and it doesn't work. So my idea of a stock solution is to make sure this is mixed to the best of my ability, and then by using quite a few teaspoonfuls, I even it out so that I get a much more balanced mix. So now I can start shoveling stuff in here. And how much goes in here is irrelevant. It really doesn't matter. But the more I use, the more chance I've got of getting an even balance of all of the elements in this mix, which are of different sizes and different shapes, including some very fine powders. So that's what I hope I've just done. That's a very strong solution. That would kill stuff. Lid back on, quick. That stuff absorbs moisture at a rate of knots. So now I have my stock solution, not ready to use. But when pouring that in with my RO water, what I can do is check the TDS reading against the benchmark that I've just created. And although these figures are relatively rough figures, they're good enough. Neither miles too strong, nor miles too weak. Somewhere near it. A rough idea that will work. So that's my stock solution now, and we go back to the pure RO water and a sploop. TDS meter, check the reading. Too much sploop, bit more RO water, not enough sploop, another little sploop, until I get my TDS reading that I want, knowing where I started from. So that's it. Now I'm going to go away and worry about that pH reading and see if that's normal, because that sounds incredibly low. I wonder if it changes. pH has a funny thing. It's affected by temperature and all sorts of things, and this is not exactly a brilliant meter, to say the least. No, it definitely wants to stay around the 4.5 mark. So that's what that mix comes out at. A weaker mix would have a higher pH. A very weak mix, a higher pH yet again. Yeah, heading back towards the 7 mark, which quite honestly is a bit high for orchids. It's recommended somewhere between 5.5 and 6.5. And I don't think there's a lot of science in that recommendation either, quite honestly. Not a lot of work's been done on the old pH front. But the work that has been done is based on testing the water at the plant's source in their natural environment, which is about as good as you can get, I suppose. You know, people have actually gone out with test tubes and things and caught the rainwater as it's falling on the plants and then measured the pH. So really they're measuring what was originally rainwater up in the sky that's come down and landed on the trees, gone across the leaves, down the branches, run down the trunk and got to where the orchid is. And at that point the pH is measured. See, that pH could have altered by running across the leaves, down the branches, you know, through bits of debris stuck in the branches, picking up some bird poo on the way. You know, it's not an exact science, but that's where that arbitrary figure of 5.5 to 6.5 has come from. That's why we know that some of the Paphiopedilums that grow in limestone areas don't like a pH that low. They like a much higher value, way up above 7, heading towards the 8 mark because of where they come from. But you need to know which Paphiopedilums you're dealing with, because some of them grow on the forest floor in the leaf litter. And I can assure you that is not alkaline. It's got breaking down leaves and stuff. It's going to be acidic or more acidic. Okay, so that's how we're going to work now. Bit of work to do on that pH level because I don't like it. But I'll work out, you know, I'll spend some time dealing with it. But the first thing I need to do is use some of that and water me flipping plants. Spent a lot of time working on this, and, you know, once again, thanks to Ray for a quick response. Another response from my reply just to confirm that what I've just done actually makes sense to him. You know, main man, got back to me quickly. We like that. And we'll go from there. So, a bit more on the water and feeding science based on that stuff. The science goes out the window if it's not that stuff. I'm dealing with that because that's what I use, and RO water is the base that goes into. Yeah? If you're using tap water and that stuff, you've got a problem. There's a separate mix to go with tap water, well water, whatever you want to call it, that naturally assumes you've got a higher mineral content. But do be aware, from somebody who sounds like they know what they're doing, just because you've used an RO unit to get pretty pure water, the pureness of that water is the mineral content. You've taken out the molecules. It doesn't necessarily mean you've got a base pH of 7. It depends on the start point of the water that went into the RO unit at the front end, because in theory, some of the elements that affect pH would have been taken out via the RO unit. So it's worth checking what comes out the end of your RO unit if you've got one. And if you haven't got all this fuss, have you? Okay, if there's anything to add on to this, I will. Otherwise, I wanted to keep that relatively short and sweet. That's how, and also why, and, you know, what I'm going to do for the future. Okay, so see you next time. Hope that helps, or probably confuses even more. All good fun. Bye for now. Okay, quick add on the end. You know there usually is one. I chickened out. I'm always saying that if you're going to change things for your orchids, do it gradually. And to suddenly jump from using a TDS reading of about 180, 190 for what was a reasonable feed, I thought, to over 600 is too much. In one go, you know, that's from going from having snack meals to eating a 16-ounce steak with all the vegetables in one go. You'd be bloated. So I've put some more RO water in there, and as a consequence of weakening that mix a bit, I'm down to just over 400 now for this watering. I'm happy with that. That splits the difference between like 200-ish and 600-ish, so it's just over 400, about 420. Happy with that. As a consequence, that raised the pH a little, but it didn't take long to find out. If you want to raise your pH, add a bit of bicarb, and that did the job, just a pinch. That took that up from about 5.2 to about 5.8, a pinch. literally next to nothing. So that stuff works to raise the pH without harming what's in there, because a pinch in that amount of water can't do any harm. So that got my pH value up to something I'm happier with, and that's something I can just do if I choose to do. It's not going to harm the plants. If I can eat it, so can the plants. And that goes in stuff when you're cooking, basically. Yeah, so I've now got something that's about a TDS reading of 420. I know everything that's gone into that, and I've brought my pH back up to a value I'm happy with. Not too low, not too high, in that sort of middle range somewhere. So I'm happy with that, and that may need to be a permanent solution as I build up to the stronger feed, but I'm not doing it all in one go. They'll probably get a couple of feeds at this level, then a flush, and then perhaps build up a little bit more. But my idea of feeding frequently at lower levels still stands. I'm not breaking that for this year. That's something I didn't do last year. I fed at much higher levels last year, but didn't feed as often. Now this year I'd like to feed far more frequently, but not as strong. So that's how I'm going to continue for a bit. If I change my mind, I'll let you know. Bye for now. It's all good fun, isn't it? And just while we have a look at my newly opened Vanda in the morning sunshine, just coming round, an afterthought to what I've just said about all that stuff with watering and pH and all that cobblers like that. I think I've resolved the issue of the possibility of nutrient deficiency. I don't think it's any one specific nutrient, it's all of them. I've been starving me plants, and some would react to that more than others, and it would be the faster growers that would react the quickest and the worst. So anybody want some CalMag? Because I really don't think I need it. Still, it didn't cost much, and I'll probably try it now and again as a little booster for those that are growing well. But yeah, I think I've resolved yet another issue that I was treating as a side issue. I don't think I've got any nutrient deficiencies at all on any specific nutrient. I just think I've got a general deficiency. Plants that are trying to grow really well and not getting enough food are going to suffer in one shape or form. Some of them are suffering by getting yellow patches because they're not being able to make their chlorophyll, and others are probably just growing slower than perhaps they ought to be, and others probably aren't taking a blind bit of notice. But trying to differentiate is damn near impossible, and having a good balanced feed at the right level with a suitable pH has just got to be the aim. So hopefully that's where I am now. That is a beauty. That's going to have 5 buds on it. And another spike coming up behind. So yeah, looking good. Yeah, that's brightened me up a bit. See you next time.